Why did her hands feel colder than the morning air? That was the first thing she noticed before everything spiraled, before the laughter, before the ropes, before the helicopter's shadow carved across the sunlit yard. Lieutenant Mara Keaton stood at the edge of the training field, scanning rows of cadets as they wrapped up their drills. Nothing about that morning suggested danger. Only routine. Only sunlight. Only the quiet strain of someone who'd slept barely 3 hours. She exhaled slowly, pushing her thumb over the frayed edge of her clipboard. Maybe that was what the coldness was, not fear, just exhaustion. The kind she never admitted to. The kind she hid behind the same steady posture she'd built her entire reputation on. A small tremor ran through her fingers anyway. She curled them into a fist, hoping no one saw. But one cadet did. He was young, too young to understand the weight of what he was about to start. He nudged the boy beside him and whispered something, not even bothering to hide the smirk. Mara ignored it. Cadets joked. They pushed boundaries. It was normal. Or it should have been. But there was something else underneath their eyes today, something testing, something sharp. Something she hadn't told anyone about, not yet. She took one step forward. Form up in rows, you have 15 minutes to. A hand cut through the air, waving, disrespectful. Ma'am, before we do all that, quick question. Mara kept her voice level. Go ahead. The cadet stepped closer, too close. How does someone like you get put in charge of us anyway? Soft chuckles rippled through the group. Someone like you. The phrase bit deeper than he intended, though she refused to show it. People had been asking that same question in whispered corners for months. She'd heard the murmurs, the doubts, the judgments dressed up as concern. Her husband was a captain, and despite her experience, despite her years in the field, some people believed she'd only climbed because of him. She felt the familiar burn in her chest, but she steadied her breath and with a small nod answered calmly, the same way anyone does, with training, discipline, and... A second cadet cut her off, stepping behind her. Or maybe you got lucky. More laughter. Mara's jaw tightened. That's enough, back in formation now. But they didn't move. Instead, 5 of them slowly formed a half circle around her. It was still playful on the surface, smiles, teasing, nothing overtly threatening. But it was wrong. It was disrespectful. And something about the cadence in their movements set off every instinct she'd learned the hard way in her deployments overseas. This wasn't a prank. This was a test. She raised her chin, refusing to step back. Last warning. The first cadet tilted his head, acting innocent. We're just messing around, ma'am. He reached for her clipboard. She pulled it back, but he grabbed it anyway, ripping it from her hands with a grin. Another hand closed around her wrist. Her breath hitched. Cadet, release me. But before her words had even finished leaving her mouth, rope brushed against her arm. Rope, where had they even gotten that? Her heartbeat spiked. She tried to pull back, but 2 of them steadied her shoulders, laughing as if this were a game. Her boots scuffed in the dirt. The morning sun warmed her face, but her skin prickled cold as they forced her back toward the tall pine behind her. Stop this right now. Her voice cracked only slightly, but enough for her to hear it, enough for that old fear to flicker awake in her chest. This is harassment. You're crossing a line. One of them imitated her stern tone, mocking her. Another pressed her shoulder harder into the bark, and then the rope looped across her forearm, pulled tight, coarse fibers biting into her skin. She gasped, not from pain but from disbelief. She wasn't scared of pain, she'd been through worse, but this was different. It was humiliation. Public, deliberate humiliation. Across the field, recruits paused. Some looked uncertain. Others avoided eye contact entirely, pretending not to see. The silence from them cut deeper than the rope. She sucked in a shaky breath as another loop tightened around her waist. You don't want to do this, she said, softer now, trying to anchor them back to reality. This will ruin your future, think. The cadet tying the knot shrugged. "Relax, ma'am, it's just discipline training, builds toughness, right?" A wave of laughter rolled behind him. She felt it then, the old ache from a conversation she'd overheard last week. A group of officers whispering near the hallway, convinced she couldn't hear them, questioning whether she was fit enough, commanding enough, respected enough. One sentence had followed her for days. "She doesn't look like she belongs out there." She swallowed those words, tucked them away, and kept moving. But now, bound to a tree while boys barely out of school giggled. Those whispers came roaring back. Her breath shuddered. She blinked hard, trying to keep her composure as they tugged the last knot tight. The bark dug into her spine. Sunlight flickered between leaves above her, impossibly bright for such a degrading moment. One cadet plucked her blue training cap off her head and twirled it around a finger before tossing it into the dirt. "You don't talk like a leader," he said. "You don't look like one either." That one hit deep, too deep. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, she swallowed everything, anger, shame, disbelief, and forced herself to breathe slowly. In, out. Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't break. Don't let the cold creeping up your arms turn into tears. She scanned the field, desperate for one person, just one to step forward. No one did. She closed her eyes for one long second, fighting the hollow ache spreading through her chest. This wasn't about ropes. It wasn't even about physical restraint. It was about dignity. And hers was hanging by a thread. A distant rumble broke through her spiraling thoughts. A sound she couldn't mistake. Deep, rhythmic, growing louder across the hills. Her eyes snapped open. No, not now. Her stomach clenched as the tremor in the ground grew stronger. Dust lifted in soft curls around the cadets' boots. Their laughter faded as they looked upward, shielding their eyes. She didn't want him to see her like this. Not like this. Not tied to a tree like some helpless. The helicopter crested over the ridge in a burst of sun glare, blades chopping the air with military authority that silenced everyone below. Her heartbeat crashed against her ribs, because she knew that aircraft, knew the way it banked slightly to the right, knew the pilot's hand behind that movement, knew the timing of the descent, too sharp, too urgent, too personal. Jonathan, her husband, he shouldn't have been here. He was supposed to be across the base, in briefing, preparing for a mission she wasn't allowed to know about yet. So why was he flying toward her like the world was on fire? A question punched through her. Who told him? And what exactly had they said? The helicopter barreled lower. Dust spiraled violently across the yard, forcing cadets to stumble back. Mara squeezed her eyes shut against the wind as the helicopter touched down hard, too hard. He'd never land like that unless something inside him was already broken open. The side door slid. His boots hit the earth before the skids finished settling. He was running. Her breath caught. And though the world spun with dust, sunlight, and the sting of rope, one truth cracked through everything. He had come for her. Vast, fierce, afraid. She had seen that fear only once before, and what happened that day had reshaped both of them. But he had never told anyone that story. And neither had she. Not yet. Why did he look like he'd already failed her? That was the expression Jonathan wore as he cut through the dust, boots thundering across the training field, eyes locked on his wife as if the entire world narrowed to the tree behind her. Mara couldn't move, but her breath hitched at the urgency in his stride, so sharp it bordered on desperation. The cadets stepped aside instinctively, their earlier cockiness dissolving under the weight of a captain running like a man who feared he might be too late. He stopped inches from her, his chest rising fast, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, at the rope biting her wrists, the red marks on her arm, the dirt on her uniform. And something inside him snapped. Not visibly, Jonathan didn't explode like other soldiers. He imploded, silent, controlled, but frightening when the storm gathered beneath the surface. "Who tied you?" he asked finally, voice low, rough. Mara exhaled, the sound shaky. "It's not what it looks like." He didn't believe that, not for a second. His fingers slid over the rope, tracing the knots, the tension. He recognized the cadets' handiwork instantly, too tight, too messy. Not training knots, not anything sanctioned, just carelessness tied into humiliation. He pulled a small blade from his boot and sliced clean through the rope with one swift motion. The pressure released suddenly, and Mara's knees nearly buckled. He caught her before she fell, arms firm, protective but trembling at the edges. "You're shaking," he whispered. She forced herself to stand. "It's nothing." But he heard the lie. He felt it. He always did. Behind them, cadets hovered in uneasy silence, trying to shrink into the background. The tallest one, a boy with too much bravado and not enough wisdom, opened his mouth. "Sir, we didn't mean." Jonathan turned his head, and the cadet froze mid-excuse. The captain's stare wasn't loud. It was devastatingly quiet. A controlled disappointment that landed harder than any insult or punishment could. Mara swallowed, lifting her chin. "Let me handle it." Jonathan blinked, the smallest hesitation. She wasn't asking permission, she was asserting control. Her dignity might have been bruised, but she wouldn't let him fight her battles for her. Not all of them. Still, the fear in his eyes didn't leave. It clung to him like a shadow. She stepped forward, her wrists sore, her voice unsteady but strong enough. "Look at me." The cadets lifted their eyes. "This wasn't training," she said. "It wasn't discipline, and it wasn't a joke." One cadet shifted nervously, another swallowed, a third stared at the dirt, cheeks burning. "You crossed a line," she continued, "and you know it." Silence. The wind rustled through pine needles above them, the only sound filling the tension between them. But even as she spoke, something tugged at her, a memory she didn't want to revisit, a memory she thought she'd buried deep enough to never surface again. It returned anyway, a flicker, a breath, a voice she never forgot. A man's voice. One she hadn't heard in years. One tied to a day that changed her marriage forever. Jonathan touched her elbow gently, pulling her from the spiral. She blinked the memory away and cleared her throat. "Apologize to the uniform, then apologize to yourselves, because today you acted smaller than you are." The eldest cadet, the one who threw her cap, let out a shaky breath. His voice trembled. "Ma'am, we're sorry. We thought," his voice cracked, "we thought it was funny." "It wasn't," she said. "No," he whispered, "it was." One by one, the others murmured apologies, awkward, raw, honest in the way only young men caught between immaturity and conscience could manage. Mara didn't soften. She didn't reassure them. Some lessons weren't meant to be cushioned. But even as she stood tall, something inside her felt unsteady. Something from earlier. Something heavy she'd been carrying for days. Jonathan noticed. He always did. He stepped closer when the cadets stepped back. "Mara," he murmured, "what aren't you telling me?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to ask it here, in front of the entire yard. But he saw everything, every flicker of emotion, every shift in her breathing. He'd been reading her like this since before they were married, before the deployments, before the night that nearly broke both of them. Not here, she thought, not now. Jonathan's hand settled on her arm. "Talk to me." But before she could answer, someone across the yard shouted her name. "Lieutenant Keaton, Captain Keaton, command needs you both, urgent." The word urgent did more than interrupt. It cut through her chest. Jonathan's posture changed instantly. Soldier mode. Ready, controlled, focus sharpening like a blade. He turned back to her, voice quieter. "We'll finish this later." Mara nodded, but her stomach clenched, because she knew exactly what urgent meant. And she'd been dreading this. The commanding officer waved them over from the far side of the yard. "Inside, now." Jonathan placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked, guiding without crowding. But even that light touch sent a tremor through her. She hated that, hated feeling so fragile. She wasn't fragile. But humiliation did something violence never could. As they entered the building, Mara kept her eyes straight ahead. She refused to let the remaining recruits see the strain in her expression. Only when the door closed behind them did Jonathan finally ask what had been burning inside him from the moment he saw her tied to that tree. "Tell me why you froze." Her breath caught. "What?" "You didn't fight them." His voice wasn't accusing, it was worried, deeply. "You've disarmed armed men before. You've taken down targets twice your size, but today you let them restrain you. Why?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because he was right. She hadn't fought. Not really. Not like she could have. And she knew exactly why. But that memory, God, that memory felt like a scar she didn't want touched. Not yet, not in this hallway. "Jonathan, please," she whispered, "not now." He studied her for a long moment, trying to read the thing she was hiding beneath her steady posture. But before he could respond, the briefing room door opened, spilling harsh, fluorescent light into the hallway. "Captain Keaton, Lieutenant Keaton, inside." The officer's voice sharpened. "We have a situation." Jonathan squeezed her hand once, subtle, grounding. She breathed out slowly. Whatever came next. This wasn't just about the cadets anymore. And as they stepped into the briefing room, Mara felt it settle in her bones. Something bigger was coming. Something tied to the fear in Jonathan's landing. Something connected to the secret she hadn't found the courage to tell him yet. Something that would force both of them to face a truth they'd been avoiding since the night everything changed. Why did the room feel colder than the hallway? Mara stepped into the briefing chamber with Jonathan beside her, but something in the air shifted the moment the door shut. Conversations halted. Screens flickered with red-coded intel she couldn't interpret fast enough. Officers stood stiff, jaws tight, eyes avoiding hers in a way she recognized too well. It wasn't disrespect. It was worry, serious worry. The commanding officer, Colonel Briggs, didn't waste a second. "We don't have time for pleasantries. Sit." Jonathan sat. Mara hesitated for a fraction of a heartbeat, then followed. Briggs tapped a button, and the lights dimmed until only the screen glowed across their faces. A map appeared, satellite images, heat signatures, and then a location she knew, a location she never wanted to see on a classified screen again. Her pulse stuttered. The colonel noticed. "You recognize it?" Jonathan turned toward her instantly. "Mara." Her throat tightened. "Yes, I know that village." He frowned. "How?" But she didn't answer, not because she was hiding it, but because speaking it aloud would unravel everything she'd tucked away for months. Briggs continued, unaware of the storm building inside her. "We received intel 20 minutes ago. A hostile group resurfaced there, and they've taken hostages." Jonathan straightened. "Civilians?" "No," Briggs said. "Two of ours. A recon team went dark at 900. Their last transmission mentioned a possible ambush." Jonathan's jaw locked. "Which team?" Briggs hesitated. "Team Orion." Jonathan swore under his breath. He knew those soldiers. He trained 2 of them. He'd vouched for one. Mara felt the room tilt slightly. The walls felt too close, too bright, too loud. Because Team Orion had been operating near a place she had tried for months to forget. A place tied to the memory that froze her earlier. A place tied to a man whose voice still echoed in her worst nights. Briggs continued. "We need a fast extraction, a quiet one, and we need a pilot who can get in and out without triggering half the valley." Jonathan leaned forward. "I'll fly." "Of course you will," Briggs said, "but you're not going alone." Then he turned to Mara. She froze. Jonathan did too. No, he said immediately. Absolutely not. She's not assigned to. Captain Briggs cut in. She knows that terrain. Mara closed her eyes for 1 second, the memory slamming into her before she could brace. A village on a fog-covered morning. A boy holding a radio. A scream she couldn't forget. A promise she couldn't keep. She forced a breath. Sir, why me? Briggs studied her with a look she rarely received, one that saw past rank and uniform. Because you've been there before. You never filed a full report, but the incomplete one says enough. You survived something there, something the rest of the team didn't. Jonathan's head snapped toward her. What is he talking about? Her chest tightened painfully. Jonathan, not now. Briggs lifted a hand. We'll have time for details later. Right now, we need both of you. She has ground familiarity. You have air control. Together, you're our best chance. Mara swallowed hard. When do we deploy? In 1 hour. Jonathan stood abruptly. The chair screeched across the floor. That's not enough prep time. It's all we have, Briggs replied. And Captain, if you can't do this, tell me now. I'll get another pilot. Jonathan's nostrils flared. I'm going. Briggs nodded. Then you two need to talk. Now, whatever this is that I'm sensing between you, fix it before you're hovering over a hostile zone with no margin for error. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The hallway looked empty, quiet, but the tension between them filled the space like smoke. Jonathan turned to her, voice low but shaking. What did he mean? You never filed a full report. She looked away, because I couldn't. Mara, his voice broke. You're hiding something from me, something big, and today when those cadets tied you. Don't, she whispered, her throat burned. No, he stepped closer. You froze, you never freeze, not like that, not unless. Her eyes lifted to meet his. He stopped mid-sentence. Because he saw it. The truth she'd been burying. The fear she'd been masking. The memory she couldn't let surface. Not even to him. Mara, he said again, but quieter this time. Talk to me, please. She exhaled slowly, the breath uneven. It was 8 months ago, a joint mission, a village we were told was safe. Her voice cracked. It was. His expression softened instantly, pain flickering across his features. You were ambushed. No, not exactly. She clenched her hands. We were doing a routine check. An elderly woman waved us into her courtyard, said she'd found something dangerous. She swallowed. It was a trap, but not for all of us, just for me. Jonathan's breath hitched. She locked the gate behind us. The others tried to break in, but it was too late. Mara blinked hard. There was a man there. I never got his name, never saw his face clearly. He wanted something from me, something I refused to give. And when I fought back. Stop, Jonathan's voice shook. His hand trembled as he reached for hers. You should have told me. I couldn't, she looked at the ground. I didn't want to bring that darkness into our home, and I didn't want you looking at me like I was, her breath faltered. Broken. He cupped her face gently. You're not broken. She didn't answer, she didn't believe it. He pulled her into a tight embrace, one hand at the back of her head, the other around her waist, as if holding her was the only thing keeping him together. But she remained stiff in his arms, frozen in memory. He felt it, and it scared him. Mara, he whispered into her hair, you have to tell me everything, because we're headed back there, and I need to know what we're walking into. Her eyes lifted, haunted. You think I didn't try to forget? I tried to bury it. But walking into that briefing room, seeing that map, it all came back. He pulled back, searching her eyes. Then trust me with it. Let me carry some of that weight. She swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. I'm afraid. He brushed her cheek. Of what? That the man from that village didn't disappear. Her voice was barely audible. I think he's alive, and I think he's the reason Team Orion went missing. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Mara, why didn't you say that in the briefing? Because I'm not sure, she whispered, and because I don't know what he wants. Jonathan stepped back slowly, realization spreading across his face. No, he said, you do know. Her eyes welled for the first time. He wants me to come back. Silence fell heavy between them. Not fear. Not shock. Something far worse. Because Jonathan understood now. This mission wasn't a coincidence. It was personal. Deliberate. A message. Mara, he said softly, we're not going in just to rescue Team Orion. She nodded, breath trembling. He's waiting for me. Why did goodbye feel heavier this time? Mara stood in the dim locker room, fingers trembling as she zipped her vest, each motion tight and mechanical. The bass outside hummed with urgency, rushing boots, engine tests, clipped voices, but in here everything felt too quiet, too still, like the silence before a storm that already knows your name. Her reflection stared back at her in the metal locker door, pale, focused, but beneath that something cracked, something she couldn't hide from herself anymore. The door behind her creaked open. Jonathan stepped in, already geared up, helmet tucked under one arm. His eyes softened when he saw her, but worry pinched the corners of his expression. We leave in 15. She nodded. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mara, are you sure you're ready for this? She swallowed. I don't get to choose ready. Yes, you do. No, she said quietly. I only get to choose whether I run from this or stop letting it run me. He exhaled, something like pride flickering through the fear in his eyes. But she didn't feel proud. She felt exposed, raw, like every scar she tried to bury had been peeled open in one morning. Jonathan reached out, brushing his thumb over the faint rope mark on her wrist. She flinched before she could stop herself. His hand froze. That's what scares me, he whispered. You're carrying too much already. She pulled her arm gently away, avoiding his gaze. What happened with those cadets? It wasn't the rope, it was the feeling. Her voice trembled. Of being trapped, outnumbered, not being heard. That courtyard, it felt the same. He closed his eyes, jaw tightening with pain. I should have known something was wrong. You've been different for months, quieter, far away sometimes. I thought maybe it was just stress, but... She cut him off softly. You couldn't have known. I didn't want you to. He opened his eyes, meeting hers. Why? She took a shaky breath. Because I didn't want you to carry the ugliness of it. Because loving you was the only place that still felt untouched. Jonathan stepped closer, pressing his forehead gently to hers. I married you knowing you'd have battles I couldn't see, but I'm supposed to be the person you tell when the world goes dark. Her breath hitched. I was afraid it would change how you look at me. It didn't, he said. It won't. She nodded but didn't fully believe it. Not yet. He kissed her forehead once, soft and grounding. Then he stepped back, pulling on his helmet. Mara, he said, no matter what we find out there, I'm with you. A voice crackled over the intercom. Keaton team, report to hangar. Jonathan offered his hand, not as a lover, not as a captain, but as someone asking her to take one step forward with him. She took it. The hangar roared with engine noise. Technicians rushed around, fuel lines clanged, and the smell of oil and dust swirled thick in the air. The helicopter stood ready, its rotors slicing slow circles, waiting to carve into the sky. Mara climbed in beside Jonathan, strapping into the seat just behind him. The familiar feel of the harness steadied her breath. Missions, she understood those, procedure, movement, tasks to occupy the mind. It was easier to fight external chaos than internal ghosts. The crew chief leaned in. We've got a 35-minute flight. Low visibility pockets in the valley. Intel says the village is quiet, too quiet. Mara stiffened. Jonathan noticed. Copy, he said, voice crisp. We'll stay low. As the crew chief stepped out, Jonathan turned his head just enough for her to see his eyes behind the visor. "If you feel overwhelmed, tell me." She gave the smallest nod. The engines roared to life. The ground trembled. The rotors blurred above them and the helicopter lifted, pulling them into open sky. Sunlight flashed across Mara's face as they ascended. The base shrank beneath them, cadets, yards, buildings, until everything that had happened earlier felt distant, unreal. But her mind wasn't on the base. It wasn't on the cadets or the humiliation or the apologies. It was on the village, on the courtyard, on the man in the shadows who spoke her name like he already owned her fear. The wind whipped through tiny gaps in the cabin, carrying the scent of pine and distant soil. The landscape rolled beneath them, green patches, winding rivers, harsh cliffs. Beautiful, too beautiful for what waited ahead. Jonathan spoke through the comms. "Talk to me." She hesitated. About what? About him. Her breath faltered. "Jonathan, you don't have to tell me everything. Just tell me what you're afraid of walking into." She watched the horizon tighten into rugged mountains. Her fingers curled against her thighs. "He wasn't like the others," she said finally. "He was calm, too calm. Like hurting people wasn't violence to him, it was routine." Jonathan's hands tightened on the controls. She continued, voice barely above the hum of the engine. "He asked me questions, strange ones, personal ones. He never touched me, but he made me feel like he already knew things he shouldn't." Jonathan's voice dropped dangerously low. "What kind of things?" She closed her eyes. "About you, our marriage, my fears, things I'd never said out loud, like he'd studied me before we even arrived." Jonathan's breath caught. "Are you telling me he targeted you?" "I don't know." Her throat tightened. "I didn't want to believe it, but then Team Orion disappeared near that village. And now you think this is connected." Her hands trembled again. "I think he's waiting for me." Jonathan stared forward, jaw clenching hard. "Then we don't walk into his trap blind. We walk in together." She wanted to believe that was enough. The valley opened beneath them, vast and shadowed. Fog clung to the riverbanks like low, crawling smoke. The village emerged out of the haze, a cluster of worn rooftops, cracked stone walls, narrow pathways carved into a place time had forgotten. Mara's heart dropped into her stomach. Jonathan's voice came through the comm. "We're approaching the LZ." The crew chief leaned forward. "Thermal shows no movement, nothing, dead quiet." "That's not a good sign," Mara murmured. She scanned the rooftops, the broken archway, the courtyard where she'd once stood, blood pounding in her ears, the smell of damp earth mixing with terror. Her pulse sped. Jonathan angled the helicopter lower. Trees blew sideways under the rotor wash. Dust spiraled upward from the clearing. The landing was smooth, much smoother than the frantic touchdown earlier that morning. But the silence waiting outside the cabin felt far more dangerous. Jonathan unbuckled, then turned to her. "You ready?" She nodded even though she was, not completely, not truly, but readiness wasn't courage. Courage was walking anyway. They stepped onto the clearing. The silence swallowed them whole. Mara scanned the shadows under the rooftops, the alleyways, the cracked well. Everything looked exactly the same. Too exactly. Jonathan walked beside her, protective but not smothering. He moved like a soldier, but watched her like a husband. "This place," she whispered, "hasn't changed." "Places don't change," he murmured. "People do." She almost told him she wasn't sure she had. But then, a sound cracked through the silence. A single metallic click. Jonathan grabbed her arm, pulling her behind cover as he drew his weapon. Mara's heart slammed into her ribs. The fog shifted. Footsteps echoed. Slow, intentional, familiar. Jonathan whispered, "Who is that?" Mara's breath froze in her chest as a figure stepped into view. The same posture, The same calm stride. The same chilling stillness. "It's him," she whispered. The man who had once studied her like a puzzle. The man she feared might still be studying her. The man who said he would see her again. And now, here he was. A ghost she never outran. Why wasn't he holding a weapon? That was the first thing Jonathan noticed as the man stepped out of the fog, calm, deliberate, unhurried. No rifle, no sidearm, just empty hands and an expression that chilled the air more than any gun could. Mara's breath hitched. Her fingers twitched near her holster, but she didn't draw yet. Something about the man's presence pulled her backward in time, back to that courtyard, that voice, that feeling of being seen too deeply. Jonathan angled his body slightly in front of her, protective reflex kicking in. The man stopped several yards away, head tilted as if analyzing an old photograph. His eyes flicked to Mara, then settled there like he'd found the thing he came for. "You came back," he said. His voice hadn't changed, smooth, steady, unsettling in its softness. Jonathan's jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped beneath his skin. "Hands where I can see them," Jonathan said. The man lifted them lazily. "Why? You already know I'm not here to kill you." Jonathan raised his weapon higher. "I won't tell you again." The man's eyes didn't leave Mara. "The captain is protective, admirable really, but unnecessary, she and I." "Don't say another word," Jonathan snapped, stepping forward. Mara grabbed his arm. "Jonathan, stop." He turned to her, stunned. "What?" She swallowed hard. "He's not going to attack, that's not his style." "That's exactly why you should let me put him on the ground," Jonathan hissed. But she shook her head, breath trembling. "Listen." The man smiled faintly, as if pleased she still understood how he operated. Jonathan stared at her, torn between instinct and the trust he always placed in her. Reluctantly, he lowered his stance a fraction, but didn't drop his guard. Mara finally faced the man fully. "We're Team Orion." "Close," he said lightly. "Alive for now." Jonathan took a sharp step forward, gun raised again. "Where?" The man didn't flinch. "If I wanted them dead, they'd be dead already." Mara's pulse hammered. "What do you want?" His expression shifted, something subtle, dangerous. "The same thing I wanted 8 months ago. Answers." Jonathan's teeth ground together. "You want to interrogate her, over my dead body." The man tilted his head. "Not interrogate, understand." He turned his attention back to Mara. "You ran last time. You filed a half report that conveniently left out everything important. I've been waiting for you to finish the conversation." Mara felt her breath catch painfully. "You had no right to what you did." "I didn't touch you." "That doesn't make it harmless." The man stepped closer. Jonathan stepped in front of her instantly. The man stopped, amused. "You think proximity is harm," he said. "But fear, shame, silence, those do far more damage." Jonathan's eyes darkened. "You don't get to talk about her." "And yet," the man replied softly, "she hears me anyway." Mara swallowed hard, because the worst part was he was right. His voice lived somewhere in the cracks she tried so hard to seal. The man lifted a small device from his pocket and dropped it into the dirt. Jonathan's finger tightened on the trigger until Mara grabbed his forearm again. "It's just a communicator," she whispered. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" Her voice shook. "Because he used one like it in the courtyard. He always gives people a choice before he does anything." The man smiled again. "You remember." Mara felt sick. Jonathan glared at the device. "What is that?" "A tracker," the man said, "for your missing team, but you only get the coordinates if she's willing to talk." Jonathan stepped closer to him, gun raised so high the barrel almost touched the man's forehead. "If you think I'm letting her go anywhere with you." "You aren't letting her do anything," the man replied calmly. "She decides." Jonathan's breath came fast, shallow. He turned to Mara, desperation creeping into his voice. You don't owe him anything, not a single word. We'll find Team Orion another way. Mara's throat tightened. Jonathan, what if there is no other way? He looked at her like she'd stabbed him. Are you seriously considering this? Her voice cracked. They'll die if we don't. And what about you? His voice rose, not in anger but in fear. What about what this does to you? She looked toward the broken rooftops, the courtyard entrance, the memories that clawed at her every time her eyes closed. This ends where it started, she whispered. I can't keep running from this. Jonathan stepped closer, hands trembling. Mara, please, not like this. You don't have to face him alone. The man's voice interrupted, soft but cutting through the fog. She isn't alone. She's with someone who understands her fear better than you do. Jonathan snapped, violence flickering across his features as he lunged forward. Mara threw her arm out, blocking him with a desperate shove. Stop! Jonathan froze, stunned she'd physically held him back. Mara, his voice broke, don't do this. She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. I'm not choosing him, I'm choosing the truth. If I don't face him now, he'll haunt me forever. Jonathan's breath trembled. And what if he hurts you? She forced a sad, small smile. He already did, just not in the way you think. Jonathan's eyes shone with something raw, pain, frustration, love. I can't lose you. You won't, she said softly, gently touching his cheek through the helmet strap. But I need to finish what started in that courtyard. He shut his eyes tightly, fighting everything in him that screamed to stop her. Then slowly, painfully, he stepped back. Not because he agreed, but because he trusted her more than he trusted his own fear. She turned to the man. Talk, she said, and if you lie even once, you won't have to worry about Jonathan. I'll put you down myself. The man's smile faded. For the first time, something like respect flickered in his eyes. Very well, he said, walk with me. Jonathan tensed, but Mara lifted a hand. Stay here, cover me. He nodded, jaw locked so tightly it trembled. Mara followed the man toward the old courtyard, her chest tight with each step. Every stone felt familiar, every crack in the wall, every shadow. She could almost hear her heartbeat from 8 months ago, trapped in the dust. When they reached the courtyard, he stopped, turned, studied her. You never told anyone what you felt that day. Her breath shook. I told enough. You told facts, he said, not feelings. She looked away. He stepped closer slowly, hands still visible. You weren't afraid of dying. Her pulse quickened. You were afraid of losing yourself. Her stomach dropped. He continued quietly. You saw something in yourself that terrified you, something you didn't want your husband to ever know. She didn't answer, she couldn't. And then he said the thing she feared most. You hesitated, and you're terrified he'll find out. Her knees nearly buckled. Jonathan's distant voice shouted her name, but she barely heard him. The man leaned in, expression unreadable, ready to tell him now. Mara's eyes flooded, not with weakness, with truth she'd hidden too long. From Jonathan, from herself, and from the memory that wouldn't stay buried. She whispered, voice breaking. I hesitated because I wasn't sure if I wanted to live. The courtyard fell silent. The man stepped back. Jonathan, hearing enough to understand everything and nothing, ran toward her. And the truth, finally spoken, hit the ground between them like a weapon she could no longer hold. Why did the truth feel heavier in the air than any weapon? Jonathan reached her first, boots slamming into the dusty courtyard floor as he caught her by the arms. She didn't fall, but the shock in her eyes made his own breath falter. What she had said, those words, lodged in his chest like shrapnel he never saw coming. I wasn't sure if I wanted to live. He stared at her, stunned, broken, trying to understand the weight behind something he never imagined she carried alone. Mara, his voice cracked, why didn't you tell me? She swallowed, the pain in her throat visible. Because I didn't want you to see me differently. The man watched them quietly from several feet away, neither gloating nor stepping forward. He looked like someone who had finally opened a door he'd been waiting months to unlock. Jonathan's grip tightened around her shoulders, not possessive, not forceful, but terrified. Terrified of what he hadn't seen, terrified of what he might lose. "You think I'd love you less for feeling human," he whispered. Her eyes flicked up, shimmering with a truth she'd never allowed herself to admit. "I thought you'd see me as weak." Jonathan shook his head hard, almost violently. "Weak? Mara, you survived that courtyard. You walked out of a trap designed to break soldiers far stronger than most. And you carried that trauma alone, not because you couldn't speak, but because you didn't want to burden me." His breath trembled. "That's not weakness, that's heartbreak." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Before she could answer, the man spoke again. "We're wasting time." Jonathan snapped his head toward him, fury igniting again. "You stay back. She talks when she wants to, not when you pull her strings." The man didn't react to the threat. "Your team is running out of time." Mara steadied her breath. "Then why did you bring me here first?" "Because Team Orion is bait," he replied calmly. "You know that. You're the reason they're alive, and the reason they'll die if we don't move." Jonathan's gun raised instantly. "Coordinates, now." The man knelt, retrieved the small device from the dirt, tapped it twice, and tossed it at Mara's feet. She bent, picked it up. The screen flickered with a blinking dot 300 meters east, near the abandoned grain warehouse. Jonathan snatched the device from her hand. "If this is a trap—" "It is," the man replied simply, "but not the kind you think." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Explain." The man looked at Mara. "The warehouse is wired, crude explosives, enough to collapse the building, not enough to level the village. They want to send a message, not start a war." "Who's they?" Jonathan demanded. "I don't know their names," the man said, "but I know their intentions. They want her fear, they want her legacy, they want the symbol more than the soldier." Mara stepped closer. "Why me?" The man's gaze softened, just slightly. "You underestimate your value." Jonathan barked a bitter laugh. "She's worth 100 of you." The man ignored him. "You don't understand what you carry, Lieutenant. You walked out of that courtyard not as a victim, but as a witness. They want to erase that witness." Mara felt her hands trembling again. Not in fear, in clarity. For months she'd tried to silence a truth she never wanted to face, but now she saw it clearly. "That's why you let me escape," she whispered. The man nodded once. "I knew the moment I led you into that courtyard that you wouldn't break the way they expected. Fear lives loud in some, quiet in others, but you—" he paused. "Your fear becomes conviction if given space, and they're terrified of conviction." Jonathan's patience finally cracked. "Enough. You've played whatever twisted psychological game you came for. Now give us what we need." The man exhaled. "The path to the warehouse is clear, but inside there are 3 guards, 2 tripwires, and a timer. You'll have minutes." Mara frowned. "How do you know all this?" He held her gaze, unyielding. "Because I set half of it." Jonathan lunged, but Mara grabbed him again, fingers digging into his vest. "Jonathan, wait." He looked at her like she was losing her mind. "Why are you defending him?" "I'm not," she said, voice steadying. "I'm listening." "Listening?" Jonathan pointed the gun at the man's head. "He helped set the trap." The man nodded. "And I regret it." Jonathan scoffed. "People like you don't regret." The man's voice dropped. "When she walked out of that courtyard 8 months ago, I realized she wasn't who they said she was, and I realized I wasn't who I thought I was." Mara blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "I'm here to give you a chance to save them." Jonathan steadied his gun. "Why?" The man's gaze lingered on Mara. "Because you were honest with me once, during those hours in the courtyard, Even in fear, you told truth. Most people lie when faced with death. You didn't. Mara flinched. I didn't tell you anything, I barely spoke. You didn't need to, he replied. Sometimes silence tells the most. Jonathan stepped in front of Mara, shielding her with his body. You're done, step away. The man held up his hands. If she wants me gone, I'll go. Jonathan started to yell, but Myra touched his arm, a soft, broken motion that stopped him cold. Let him speak, she whispered. Jonathan looked at her, devastated. Myra, you don't owe him. I know, she said softly, but I need the truth, all of it. He swallowed, realizing she wasn't choosing the man. She was choosing closure. Mara finally asked the question that had been haunting her for months. Why didn't you kill me? The courtyard went still. The man's answer came quiet. Because you didn't want to die. You only didn't know why you wanted to live. Her chest clenched. He continued, I saw it, and I knew one day you'd come back when you understood the answer. Jonathan's voice broke. She's not here for you. The man nodded. I know, he stepped back. The warehouse is east. I'll disappear now. You'll never see me again. Mara's eyes narrowed. If you're lying. I'm not, he said. Your fear isn't mine to collect anymore. Then he turned and vanished into the fog. Jonathan let out a long, shaking breath. We're not done with him. No, Mara whispered, but we're done for today. Jonathan touched her cheek gently. You ready? For the warehouse, she said, yes. For the truth, he asked quietly. She swallowed, I'm getting there. They sprinted toward the east path, side by side, breath sinking, boots pounding dirt. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent. They found Team Orion bound but alive. They disarmed the tripwires. They pulled every soldier out before the building collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and fury. And when the final explosion echoed across the valley, Mara stood with her hands on her knees, gasping, shaking, not from fear, but from release. Jonathan came beside her. You did it. She looked at him, eyes raw. We did. He touched her hand, interlocking their fingers gently. When we get home, talk to me, all of it. I'm not afraid of your shadows. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, exhaling a long, trembling breath. I'm tired of carrying them alone. You don't have to, he whispered. And for the first time in months, she believed him. When they lifted off in the helicopter, the valley shrinking below them, Mara stared at the fatting fog, the broken warehouse, the ghost she expected to see standing there. But there was only dust. And she realized something quietly powerful. She survived because she chose to stand again. Chose to speak. Chose to face the thing that stole her voice and reclaim it. The world didn't applaud. The clouds didn't part. No music swelled. But something inside her shifted, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. A truth she had earned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply returns. And stands. And keeps standing, even when no one is watching.